Macon's Bill Number 2, Path to the Battle of Tippecanoe. The War of 1812 was a conflict between Great Britain and the newly formed United States. Leading up to the war, there were many failed compromises trying to avoid a full-out war. One of these compromises was Macon's Bill Number 2. This compromise did not work in preventing the War of 1812 to break out in the form of the Battle of Tippecanoe, which is known as the First Battle. It all started in the late 18th century with British impressment. The newly formed government of the United States was being threatened by impressment of their sailors and the cargo that was carried on the American ships. Great Britain would force the sailors from America to serve for the British Navy against their will, and use the cargo they captured as they pleased. Impressment was not only damaging to the United States physically, but it also made it seem as if Great Britain did not recognize America as its own independent country. This was because Great Britain would take American citizens and force them to serve in their navy as if they were citizens of Great Britain and not the new nation. During the Napoleonic Wars, the impressment from the British increased due to them needing more supplies to help their military efforts against Napoleon. America's neutrality in relation to this war did not stop Great Britain from continuing their impressment, and it eventually caused the government of the U.S. to try and find a solution that would keep their navy safe. There were many failed solutions to this problem, including the Embargo Act and the Non-Intercourse Act, both of which eventually led to Macon's Bill Number 2. The Embargo Act restricted trade with not only France and Great Britain, but all other foreign countries. The hope was that the economies of France and Great Britain would suffer and cause them to negotiate a trade deal with America. This is not at all what occurred. Instead of the economies of France and Great Britain suffering, America's economy was devastated. They had no foreign goods being transported in and lost all revenue from trade with other countries. It was eventually repealed and replaced with the Non-Intercourse Act. The Non-Intercourse Act allowed trade to resume with other countries, except Great Britain and France. This act was again proved ineffective and led to Macon's Bill Number 2. This bill was named after Nathaniel Macon, who authored the first Macon's Bill. He, however, was not an author or even a supporter of Macon's Bill Number 2. The author of Macon's Bill Number 2 was John Taylor of South Carolina. He was a U.S. Senator from 1810 to 1816. He believed strongly in the idea that in order to dissuade France and Great Britain from interfering in the trade of the United States, the government must use the economy against them. Macon's Bill Number 2 coincided with this belief by resuming trade with both Great Britain and France until one decided to drop restrictions against the U.S. Once one country dropped restrictions against the U.S., the Embargo Act would be reinstated with only the country who did not drop the restrictions. France saw this as a way to injure the economy of Great Britain and contacted the U.S. government through the Cador Letter. This letter said that Napoleon was intending to lift trade restrictions against the U.S. and would therefore enact the agreement of Macon's Bill Number 2. Thomas Jefferson, president at the time, saw this letter as a formal acceptance from France and immediately placed an embargo on Great Britain. Contrary to what the letter stated, France had no intention of honoring their end of the deal, and their goal was only to injure the economy of Great Britain, not in the restrictions on the U.S. The embargo placed on Great Britain by the U.S. fueled an already raging fire. Tensions continued to rise when rumors about Great Britain helping the Native Americans and their attempt to preserve their land started to circulate. The Americans continued to push westward and give Native Americans unfair treaties in exchange for their land. This action was very common in the Midwest and western parts of the United States. William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory, was one of the driving forces of this expansion westward. He issued many of these unfair treaties to Native Americans and took over 100 million acres of their land. Eventually, Harrison offered one of these treaties to a man named Tecumseh. Tecumseh was a Native American war chief who refused the offer from Harrison. Tecumseh believed that the Native Americans should all be united in trying to keep their land and to stop the westward expansion of the Americans. Tecumseh was invited by Harrison to meet and discuss why he would not sign the treaty to give up this land. This meeting did not go as planned, for Tecumseh gave a speech to Harrison detailing that the Americans were taking the land that is rightfully that of the Native Americans. After this meeting, Harrison knew that he must try to take the headquarters of Tecumseh to push him in the direction of signing a treaty and giving up the land of the Native Americans in that particular region. Tecumseh's headquarters was called Prophetstown. While Tecumseh was away from Prophetstown, Harrison decided it was the ideal time to take the town. He marched an army to Prophetstown and planned his attempt to capture the town. His plans did not go his way, for Native Americans had seen the troops and decided that they should attack first instead of waiting for the confrontation to come to them. On November 7th, the Native Americans attacked Harrison and his army right by the Tippecanoe River, giving the battle its name. They were led by Tecumseh's brother, who was known as the Prophet. Throwing the Americans off guard gave the Native Americans a significant advantage, and they were able to inflict damage on the troops. However, Harrison and his troops eventually were able to overpower the Native Americans. The next day, Prophetstown was burned to the ground by the Americans. Harrison later detailed in his report to the Secretary of War on how successful the battle had been and how they had an overwhelming victory over the Prophet and the Native Americans. In reality, the American troops had sustained substantial injuries. Many recounts of the battle have been given by those who witnessed the events, such as Lieutenant Charles Larrabee's. His letter, which was addressed to his cousin, mostly detailed how different fighting the Native Americans was, saying, "In fighting Indians, there is no discharge of death but victory." He means to tell that this battle was a fight to the death. Larrabee goes on to say that because of the victory at Tippecanoe, he is able to stand there alive, rather than a loss that would result in his death. Harrison's letter to the Secretary of War is much more detailed in terms of the aftermath. He says in the letter, "Their participant retreat, leaving a number of the warriors dead on the field, and the subsequent abandonment of their town, attest for us a complete and decisive victory." This particular quote is William Henry Harrison detailing how the retreat of the Native Americans left Prophetstown empty and the bodies of many still on the battlefield. The abandonment of the town led to the burning of it the following day. This important battle set the stage for the rest of the war. The impact was not only felt in that time period, but was remembered in 1840 when William Henry Harrison ran for president. He used the slogan of Tippecanoe and Tyler too, as a reminder of the battle and to increase his votes. This battle was remembered as a great victory for the U.S. and certainly was able to boost the votes of the presidential candidate, as he soon won the White House. Today, the Battle of Tippecanoe is known as the first battle of the War of 1812. Looking back on how Americans got to this battle, we can see how Macon's Bill No. 2 was a factor leading up to it and the rest of the war. This shows how a failed compromise led to a conflict.